Welcome to this video on declaring variables and assigning values to variables. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. The way we declare a variable in C++ is by writing out the data type and the variable name. So there's an example of declaring a variable named salary that's going to store an integer. If I want to do more than one integer on the same line, I can write them separated by commas. Now let me talk to you just for a minute or two about the rules of creating variables. And I'm going to do that with comments up in my program. First rule is, excuse my typing, a variable must start with an alphabetic character. After that, you can have more alphabetic characters, numbers, and the underscore, but those are the only characters that can be used in a variable name. Now my rule, for the most part, and I hope I spell this right, variable name should be mnemonic. In other words, a variable name should give you some idea of what you're storing in that variable. You may be used to using X and Y in your algebra and math classes, and that works great for certain limited situations, but in general we want our variables to be meaningful to somebody reading the program. Here's something I'm going to say a lot in this course, and that's programs are as much meant to be read by people as they are to be executed by a computer. So one of the ways we make our programs readable is by using meaningful variable names. So here, let's go back to our program. So we have a couple of examples of integer variables. Let's write a couple of doubles. Now notice that I wrote out ratio and code blocks wrote it in green. That means that that's a variable that is used somewhere in the system, but that's okay. I'm redefining it in this case, so I'm going to leave it like that. If that bothers you, you could change it to something else, but I'll just leave it as it is. So here's a couple of doubles, ratio and pi. Let's write out a couple of strings. And that'll give me a chance to talk about a variable naming strategy I like to use for multi-word variables, and that's to use camel casing, where you write the first part of the variable in lowercase and then you capitalize the first letter of the second word. And you can have as many words as you want. Another way to do that would be to use the underscore to separate the first and the first word and the second word. And lots of programmers use that. I don't like it because I don't like having to type underscore, so I tend to use camel casing all the time. So there's some string variables. We'll just do one bool flag. So the first step in creating a variable is to declare it, and that's what I've done in these lines. Our integer variables, our doubles, our string, and our bool. The next step then is to assign values to them. So we're going to do something called an assignment statement. And notice I'm using the double slash. That means a comment that the compiler ignores, and we'll talk more about comments later on. I just like to start using features of the language, and you pick them up as we go. So what I'm highlighting right here is an assignment statement. Also notice that statements end in semicolons in C++. That's another thing we'll talk about further down the line in more detail. But again, I just expect you to pick it up as we go. An assignment statement involves using an operator called the assignment operator, which is the equal sign. And if I was going to read this back to you, I would say the variable salary gets the value 20,000. I would not say salary is equal to 20,000. That's a different thing, and we'll talk about that when we talk about relational expressions and in our selection structures chapter. So here we're just saying that we're giving the variable salary the value 20,000. Let's do a couple more here. So here we're assigning 40 to hours. And notice that we can assign a variable with a expression. And again, we're going to cover expressions in more detail down the road. But this is just an example of, here I'm taking the value that's in the variable salary, the value that's in the variable hours, multiplying them together, the asterisk is the multiplication operator, and assigning that to gross pay. We're going to talk about arithmetic in a separate chapter, but again, it won't hurt you to go ahead and see how it looks. Now let's work with our two string variables. Oops. You can use comments here also. So here I'm assigning the first name as Paul and the last name as McCartney on the same line. And some introductory courses would not suggest that. I think it's fine to do it that way. And then our Boolean variable, we're going to go ahead and assign it true. And remember, in my earlier lecture I talked about how true-false values are stored internally as ones and zeros, but don't ever write ones and zeros in an assignment statement. Always use the value true or false. So that's how we assign, that's how we declare variables and assign values to them. And that's going to wrap up this lecture. And then in my next lecture, we're going to talk about how to combine declaration and assignment into one statement. And we'll see how to do that in the next lecture. Hope to see you there.